Hi guys, it's me, Marilia. I want to welcome you to Salto del Gato. I'm here early this morning because I wanted to tape this little segment reviewing the Horary chart for the Lori Daybell verdict. Now, it's about 8 o'clock in the morning, so this is the second day of deliberations. So this is Friday, May 12th. And I am coming to you from Florida. I'm going to apologize ahead of time because this is Friday. I live out by a lake, and so there's a whole bunch of boats and watercraft and people doing their yards that I have no control. So here we are, day 2, and I did a chart yesterday when the deliberations first started, and there was a stellium right here in the 9th house. I'm going to use my pointer. This is the 9th house, so this is the house of, this is the courtroom. This is the principle of law, and so this is where, decisions are made and the principles of laws are applied. And there was a stellium there, which showed, obviously, the jury into deliberation. I want to call your attention today to how things have shifted. The stellium is now taking place here in this house. Those of you that are familiar with astrology know that this 12th house is the house of undoing. It's the house of confinement. And yes, prisons, hospitals, mental illness, all of that would come into play here. So the stellium has now shifted and they're here. So they are actually deliberating her sentence. The cusp sign is Gemini. The ruler of this house, because the house itself is empty, is over here in the 12th house. So the jury, how I'm going to read this, the jury is basically just deliberating the time frames, how much time she's going to get for each charge. I believe, from my interpretation of this, they have pretty much decided on her guilt. It's just a matter of hammering out, what the severity of each charge. And I don't know if the jury gets to make a recommendation for sentence, but I think that that's, in this case, what they're deliberating, is whether or not to charge her with crime degrees that would give her the maximum or less. So the jury here, this stellium shows, talk about who's here. We have Uranus, we have Mercury, and we have the Sun. And so these are all signs of intellect. So it's deliberation, it's thinking, it's looking through all the evidence and trying to come to a determination of what charges to apply and find her guilty of. So to begin with, here is the house that we enter. It's Gemini. Gemini on the cusp of a house always points to a discussion and communication amongst people, so obviously the jury. There is no planets here in this house, but the owner of this house is right next door up here in the 12th house. Those of you familiar with astrology know that the 12th house is the house of confinement, undoing, prison, hospitals, insanity, all of that. So the jury, there's a stellium here, and I believe the jury is now not so much trying to figure out whether she's guilty or not guilty. I think that they have definitely come to the conclusion that she is guilty, but they are, I think, discussing amongst themselves which of the many charges that she's charged with, because she's charged with, I think it's 2 conspiracy charges to murder and 2 actual murder charges, and then there is grand theft because she was collecting the Social Security benefits for these children even after they were deceased. So I think the jury, that's what they're kind of, I think, deciding amongst themselves. I'm not sure that we're going to get a guilty plea on the actual murder charges, or at least I think that that's where the discussions are going. I believe we're going to definitely get convictions on the conspiracies to commit murder. So there is that. I think also that we're going to get, obviously, a conviction on the grand theft. Now, here is the second house, and if you followed my way of doing the chart and using the Renaissance style of interpretation for the houses, then you know that this is a horrible house. It is one of the gates of hell. And on the cusp of this house is Cancer, and Cancer is ruled by the moon. So the owner of this house is up here in the 9th house. So we know that that house is going to be directly linked to this legal proceeding. And we have Lori here, we have Venus here, which represents a feminine energy in the sign of Cancer. Cancer is a very needy sign. It's a very spiritual sign. It's a very emotional sign. It's a sign that puts on this very harsh exterior because they're self-protecting. I think that at this point, Lori is, we're going to see more emotions coming out of her, not in a we need to feel sorry for her, but she's going to begin to see, to feel the impact of her own emotions. I think that there's going to be a lot of waterworks coming out from Lori, whether they're in public or not. I'm not sure. They're probably going to be in private. I think she's not so much remorseful for what she has done, but that she is in the situation that she's in. We have Mars here. Mars in the 2nd house. This is the house where tragic events occur. So obviously, she's involved in those tragic events. And specifically in the tragic events that befell a female and a male. So we know that two of the victims were male and 2 were female. So there is that component here. What this shows to me, there's a good chance that she might try to remove herself from the living. I think that that's a great possibility. Let's review the 2nd house. The 2nd house is the house of tragic events. It's a very unfortunate house. It is considered one of the gates of hell. It's the 2nd, 8th gates. And so here you're entering into hell. Here you're in a very bad position because your fate is out of your control. You're at the mercy of other people, which is where we find her at now. I apologize for my voice. She's kind of in a situation that's out of her control. She does not do well in that position because one of the biggest fears that she has is not being in control, not having power over her situations. And she is powerless right now. So she is just having a really difficult time dealing with herself and her situation. Mars here, and Mars co-rules this house here, which is the 6th house. And the 6th house is also a very unfortunate house. The 6th house is an interesting house. It's considered an unfortunate house. We have the South Node here. And I wrote in here this is the vertex. The vertex is not a planet. It's a little point in time. If you are a very spiritual person and you believe, like she did, that there are spiritual forces that come into play in your life, and this marks that spot where those spiritual forces from the past did come into play. And this shows that because it's in the house of pleasure, attraction, love affairs, that when she and Chad's path crossed, boom, there was a initiation of some connection from the past. So interesting that their whole thing was that they were married in the past. There is a spiritual pointing to something like that in the chart. I'm not saying that what they said is true, but there was some unresolved karma. There was some karmic debt between the two of them that they brought into this life, and on the moment that they met, that karma was initiated. Interesting. The signs on the cusp here is Scorpio, which is co-ruled by Mars, and Pluto, who's up here in the 9th house. So those would not be beneficial aspects. And let's look at the South Node. The North Node is square to Pluto. And that would mean that the South Node was... So the nodes are squaring Pluto. It's a time when it's karma is due. You got to pay this debt. This 6th house is the place. It's called the joy of Mars, the 6th house, because Mars loves, war and hard physical labor and toil. It's also, her health is probably going to deteriorate because this is a place where normally you deal with health issues. In the tarot, it is a card of the Lovers and the Devil. This situation, the Devil comes into play here. They're wicked addictions, obsessions, delusions that they were basically chained to has come to play here. And when they met, they absolutely could not resist each other. And that's interesting. That is a very heavily karmic card. And so if we look at that connection that they have professed, this whole entire connection between them is where they profess and share with the world that they were together in many past lives and that they were married to each other, besides all the other outlandish claims that they make. That one is rooted astrologically in their chart. There is an indication. The vertex is a time in your life when this is activated, then it is a fated moment. It's when you actually meet a person, and it involves a meeting of another person. When these people met, fate from their past, karmic debts from their past, they needed to pay. It was time to collect on those. There it is. And they met in a social gathering, house of love affairs, casual sexual encounters, romance. That was there. Their union is not so much that this was true love. Their union was basically based on the fact that they were both brought a bag of evil deeds that with them into this life. And they were fated to meet and for that karma to play out, unfortunately for their victims. Sad vertex, very important. Now, up here on the 10th house, if you can see that that's the 10th house, we have the Pars Fortuna. Pars Fortuna is again a point. It's not an asteroid. It's not a planet. It's not any of those things. What it is again, spirit sort of pointing and saying, hey, look over here. It's on the 10th house, and it's next to Saturn. And who is Saturn? Saturn is the debt collector. So this karma that played itself out has to be paid right here, right now. Pluto, who is the co-ruler of the 6th house, where it's time to deal with this hard work and hard labor and a hard time ahead. It's opposite of the house of prison and confinement. It shows that this is her karma. She earned this, not necessarily only by her present deeds, but by her past deeds. What a really evil and disturbed woman. here in the house of the spirit of the law, the principle of law, we have Pluto. And Pluto is here. It's time to deal with all this deep, dark evil in her. And the moon is here too, so all of her deep, dirty deeds have been uncovered. Now, as we move on, we move to the 11th house, which is the masses, the public. And everyone is anxious because we have Jupiter here in the sign of Aries. Everyone is just really anxious. Now, Jupiter's at the anaretic degree of Aries, I should say that. It's about to go into Taurus. And when that happens, there is a long span of energy to deal with. And it's going to go into Taurus, and Taurus takes its sweet time. So even though everyone right now wants the jury to make a quick decision, I think it's going to be a long time. It's not going to be a quick decision. But when the decision is made, it's going to be very final. I do not see, unless I'm very wrong, which can happen, I do not see this being a mistrial or a hung jury. I don't see that at all. It's in Taurus. And this is in Aries going into Taurus at the anaretic degree. Uranus and Jupiter. Jupiter obviously also represents the principle of law. Uranus is the freedom fighter. Let it go, let it go. There might be a disagreement amongst the jurors that, she didn't actually commit the murders. And then there's another hand that says, but all the information is here that shows she participated in the planning. So conspiracy charges, I think she will absolutely be found guilty for. I'm not sure about the murder charges. Let's recap. She will be found guilty for the conspiracy to commit murder. She will be found guilty for the grand theft, for the embezzlement. She's, a lot of people, believe it or not, see her as very mentally ill. I don't see her that way. Her spirituality became very perverted. Based on this chart, here's what I would say. I would say that she's here because it was fated, and so there is that little connection to, yes, bad karma from past actions. Now, obviously, in this life, there's been a lot of past actions, but this also is kind of like the past lives, if you believe in such a thing. If not, she believes in it. This shows her reputation is shot, and no one looks at her with any type of benevolence. Everybody thinks about her a certain way. The issue is that it's not about thinking, it's about applying the rule of law. There isn't like, we feel sorry for her. Okay, so let's go through this. We come in through the first house. Is there anybody home? No. Where is the owner of this house? The owner of this house is Mercury, because Gemini is on the cusp. Gemini represents communications and discussions. I always, in a case like this, would think, yeah, that could be the jury. They're talking amongst themselves. Gemini is, you never know with Gemini because they're always looking at two options. In here, there's a stellium in the 12th house. This 12th house is the house of imprisonment, amongst other things. Confinement, mental illness, depression, undoing, and imprisonment. And there's a stellium of planets here. Uranus, Mercury, and the Sun. Uranus and Jupiter almost, but these are all in Taurus, as is the South Node. South Node is moving forward. This is going to be the path that's going to be taken. And these two are very intellectual and signs. So what's going to convict her is, again, isn't that weird that we're getting into Pluto in Aquarius, and everything that seems to really be taking the forefront is electronic data. So all of that information from retrieved from the iCloud accounts and from the geomapping from Alex's phone is coming into strong play in the decision-making process here. Jupiter is at an anaretic degree. That's not good because it's about to shift signs and move into Taurus. So when we look for a verdict, because all of that tells us is what's going on. But the decision-making houses are always the cardinal houses. So that would be the 1st, the 4th, the 7th, or the 10th. We don't have any planets here. The owner of this particular first house is Mercury. Mercury is over here and leaning towards prison. The 4th house is also Mercury, and Mercury is over here leaning towards prison. The owner of the 7th house is Jupiter, and Jupiter is over here also voting prison. It's on the cusp. Jupiter's kind of the holdout, if you will, of what she should be charged or sentenced to prison for. Okay? So Jupiter is where they're cutting hairs on the law. And here we have Neptune ruling the 10th house, and the 10th house's ruler is over here in the 11th house, actually very close to the 11th house cusp. And we have the part of fortune there. So Saturn is Saturn's the decision maker here. Saturn is, I think, definitely screams conviction. The surprise is going to be that there's going to be a softening of the conviction somehow. There's going to be not as harsh as it could be, kind of. That's what I'm reading into it. And this is also, you notice the part of fortune there, right? So that's not necessarily that, oh, good fortune is going to befall you. It's another one of those places that is kind of a fated, a destined spot. Here is your destiny. This is where you're going. So what I would say in review is that she's definitely going to be found guilty. The jury right now is kind of deliberating. There's evidently one person at least who is, kind of picking apart the law, trying to decipher by the law what they can apply as far as guilt. Because there are, I think, 5 charges. So there's 2 charges that are conspiracy to commit murder and then actually commit the commission of the murders. And then there is the grand theft. And I believe that the actual committing the murders is where there is some questions among the jurors. Now, how much of a sentence? Taurus, and there's a stellium in Taurus. Taurus are long sentences. I believe the jury is leaning towards applying charges, and I don't know if they can recommend to the judge. I believe they might do recommendations to the judge. I'm not sure. But if they can, I think that's another thing that they're talking about is what do they suggest as sentencing for the crimes that she will be convicted of. We'll see. Because we're on jury watch. In fact, let me go and turn on the TV because this might have been already resolved. And again, thank you very much for listening and humoring me. I'll have to edit this, so I'm not sure when I'll get it on there. But right now, it's, like I said, I started this at 8. Might be getting closer to 8:30 or 9. I'm going to go turn on the TV. Not sure when court starts. I'm going to get this as edited as quickly as possible and put it up. And we'll see how right or wrong or close this horary chart. And this is a horary chart. So basically, horary is different than the event charts because I don't cast it for the time of the event. I actually cast this for the time that the question formed within my mind. And the question I asked, what will be the verdict for Lori? So let's go there. Thank you for watching.